Melany Kahn joins us tonight from Chesterfield, New Hampshire. It's now 10:30 there. So first of all, Melany, thank you for staying up so late for our benefit. And we'll be kind to you at Q&A. Secondly, I hear that you made a gift of a signed copy of your book, Mason Goes Mushrooming, to our club, and that will be a prize at this year's picnic for volunteers. So some lucky volunteer will get your book. In part, Melany grew up on an idyllic farm in West Brattleboro, Vermont, where her artist parents each had studios. They shared their love of nature and foraging with their two daughters. Her mother especially was interested in mushrooms and taught her daughters well. Melany is the author of Mason Goes Mushrooming, which is dedicated to her parents. Mason is their son. It's a wonderful book and teaching tool for children. And she spent the last many years sharing the tenets of foraging and being in the woods with both children and adults. Please welcome Melany Kahn.
Thanks, Mike. You didn't mention you've been to that farm in Vermont as one of our guest leaders on a foray here. Can everybody hear me? Yes, thumbs up? Okay. So obviously I wish I were there in person. I was there in January and I was lucky enough to have the pre-meeting dinner with you all, and then got to see J.R. Blair speak on all about changing Latin names, most of which I can't remember in the first place, and now they're changing again. So it's like, wow, this is very, very educational. I got to go out foraging with Mike for chanterelles, which I have learned are called hush puppy chanterelles there. I got to meet Maria, who was amazing with her kids as well. And I also got to be at the mushroom fair last year with Karen Rusniak running the children's tent area, which was an absolute thrill and delight. You guys run an incredible fair, and it has really informed my work this whole year with clubs all throughout the country. I've been, to Minnesota and Oregon and Texas and Massachusetts and around here, all doing children's events, and many of them very much informed by the work that you all have done there, for such a long time. So I feel like I am on the coattails of your extraordinary club in a lot of ways. I did watch Eugenia give this talk a few months ago and wondered how she did it at 10:30 at night. And she had a nice big goblet of wine next to her. And of course, she's talking about food, which is, the world's greatest subject. And I'll be talking a teeny bit about food, but not as much as our friend Eugenia. And also, I am in Vermont, and I think, the only person who is awake in the state of Vermont right now, because we all go to bed super early here, but I'm very well rested and excited to talk to you about a topic that I think is going to be a little different than what you normally are approaching with all of the various educational opportunities you have with the club. I tend to be very interactive with my Q&As and with my presentations, mostly because I'm usually talking to kids and families, and I want to keep them engaged. I don't want to be a talking head. So this is not my most comfortable situation. I'd rather be there in person. I'd actually rather really be in the woods with you all. That would be my happy place, as I'm sure it would be all of yours. But to the end of having to work with what we have, the technologies that we have, in order to be able to communicate on this night at all, I did prepare a slideshow that is succinct and short, but gives you a little, insight into the work that I'm doing. And I really want to contemplate a question which is not a scientific one. As noted, you all do a lot of mycology that is fairly, deep-rooted, a lot of peer-to-peer citizen-driven science, which is how mycology actually got started. Enormously educational, super granular. And I'd like to engage on a different sphere of our brains, which is more left brain, right brain, in terms of contemplating our own internal love, passion, even kookiness, as I like to call it, for the fungi universe, for the education of our young people coming up behind us, for the generations that came before us. Why are we drawn? Why are we here on a Tuesday night, taking our time out of our lives to come to a meeting to talk about fungi, to talk about mushrooms, to connect at this very deep level in a community around a shared passion, a shared subject that we feel so deeply drawn to? And I know you all have this shared feeling because you're here. So I don't have to guess whether or not you're a person who loves mushrooms. I know you do. And the question I have is to contemplate for a moment your own origin story of how you came to have this abiding and deep and sustaining love of learning. You're lifelong learners, and you're doing this for a reason that nobody has told you to do, only internally. In other words, you're not at a class that somebody said you got to show up for. You're not getting a grade. You're here because you're a lifelong learner. And somehow or other, you have a desire to share this knowledge in community with other people, and especially in my case, with the next generation coming behind us. So we all share this love and this desire to share it with others. And I personally have a very strong sense of a mission to inform the next generation coming up, the children around us, about the values of foraging and of fungi and of being out in nature. And that's what I'd like to explore with you all tonight. One thing I'd like you to think about just as we go into this is your own origin story. What was the first thing that somebody shared with you, or somehow you came to learn or know, that made you go like, whoop, wow, there's this whole world to discover and explore, and I want in. I want more knowledge. I'm hungry for it. So just like take a second to think about that. And I'm going to go into sharing a little bit more about my own. And then what I'd really love to do, if we have a chance, especially with the small group that we have with between the Zoom and the room, I'd love to have a little bit of interaction at the end where we can do some Q&A and also maybe share some of our own stories about how we came to be here tonight, essentially. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. And this is where I'm wishing I was under an oak tree instead of in front of a computer, but here we are. Can you all see that? Okay. So I call this Foraging, Fungi, and Fun with Families, mostly because I like alliteration, but also because really, you know, you don't have fungi without the fun, and also without bad puns and all that. So my passion has been leading children outside to hunt for wild and even edible mushrooms. So I have to start with a disclaimer, and it's not the one about mushrooms being poisonous, because we've all heard that way too much. It is the one about foragers like ourselves being kooky about mushrooms. And I want to delve into why that is, and I want to explore that kookiness in the sense of our own generational love of this and how it's being passed on. My parents were serious mushroom hunters in a day that there weren't mushroom clubs. This was in the 60s and 70s. My mom was a very good amateur mycologist, reading every mushroom book she could get her hands on. And when she died 4 years ago, we buried her on our hillside in Vermont. and she insisted on having mushroom spores thrown in on her grave so that she could come back as a mushroom. My son, Mason, the third generation forager, started foraging as a wee thing. You have to note that in his you don't see in the picture, but in his right hand, he has a pacifier, and in his left hand, he has a morel the size of his head. He's now 21. He's in college in Colorado, and he's still a really good forager. I, of course, am no help. I just wrote a children's book about mushrooming. Mason Goes Mushrooming, and I have been traveling around the country sharing that information. I've also been hauling my family into the woods looking for mushrooms since they were born. We called it church, 10 a.m. every Sunday morning. We'd head out, we'd find that spiritual connection in the woods. And of course, in doing so, we actually were doing what you all do in your daily, existence as a mushroom club. We were going out with our mushroom club. I am now on the board of our local mushroom club, and Mike has come out as a guest leader. And if any of you ever come to New Hampshire or Vermont, we go out every Sunday morning to wonderful various places, and we hunt for mushrooms. I spent this past year, and actually last 22 years, following the mushrooms around the country, making noise about the importance of foraging, and especially of foraging with children. This is my daughter, Allie, finding her first black trumpet mushroom. You can see it down there amongst the leaves, hidden in the birch and beech leaves. And the delight that she had in that, exploration and that finding of that Easter egg hunt, essentially. She was recently working on her college essays, and she mentioned a superpower. There was a question, what is your superpower? And she said her superpower was that she could identify mushrooms. And boy, can she identify mushrooms. So this one, passion that she did as a child that I sort of introduced her to and made her do, she now has owned as a grown-up, as an 18-year-old, and sort of, talks about. Foraging is not just for mushrooms, obviously. It is about being out in the woods and being observant and seeing all of the cool critters that you possibly can when you're out there. You pick up this mushroom, you turn it over, and you go, what is that thing? And you can imagine a child's delight to see what looks like, the Loch Ness monster underneath this, like area of some sort. Foraging also just immerses us fully in the outdoors when you're with kids. I mean, this child is 2 years old, having a moment with their mom, being totally present and connected and feeling alive. There's obviously away from technology, out in the woods, connecting infinitely to those mushrooms underground, because at their essence, mushrooms, as you all know, are a model of connectivity, right? That's what the mycelium network is. And connectivity, I think, is what fuels our desire to maintain this planet and teach our kids those same values. Well, I like to, bring a bag with me whenever we go out and bring home a trove of empty Diet Coke cans or whatever else we find, because even if you get skunked by the mushrooms, you can have trash in this case, a Mylar balloon, and leaving the woods nicer than you found it is part of the ethos of being, an excellent forager. There's so much connectivity in foraging, which is why I think right now there's just such an interest in it. If you look at this fairy ring and you think about seeing this for the first time, it's mind-blowing to consider that those mushrooms are following those tree roots. And you start to think of all of that connectivity that you may be missing in your life or all around you if you're not connected to what's going on in the mycelial universe, right? And so walking through the woods and having an understanding of what's going on, even the beginnings of an understanding, when you develop mushroom eyes, you start to see miraculous things like this fairy ring, and you start to feel yourself as part of something bigger, a universe that is all-encompassing and interconnected and interwoven. That, of course, also translates to the kitchen. Because if you learn how to forage and you teach your children how to forage a few beginner mushrooms, you taste their meaty flavors, you can convert even a young forager to, who might have been not that interested in mushrooms, to somebody who's really interested in their flavors, in that umami, in the way to cook them with a nice crisp, any of those things, and not to mention the fact that they are super nutritious. Here's my 7-year-old friend Senji out finding his first morel, and I think the expression says it all. When you can introduce nature early, there's a lifetime of interest and passion that can develop, and you can return to it for that sense of place and connection and an intergenerational activity to do with your grandparents for your entire lifetime. Most events that I do, somebody will say, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's folks there tonight, I learned how to forage from my uncle in Minneapolis, out in the suburbs. I went out in Seattle, and I had a great grandmother, and she was really into foraging. I went to Europe, and I met my family, and they go out in the woods. So there are so many cross-generational and cross-cultural connections to learning peer-to-peer foraging, that it sticks with kids, that their first initial introduction is something like this experience here with Senji finding his first morel. Mushrooms can also be used, obviously, for art projects. In this case, I was out in a school, Montessori school, and the kids are studying them and looking at them so carefully and drawing this earth star and taking their time and really capturing their essence. And I do that a lot with kids in art. I'll take objects like these. I hope that you can see me. Maybe you can't. But we'll talk about it afterwards. I have lots of art projects that I do with kids, just to have them be able to study them and look at them really carefully. And then, of course, when you're talking to kids about mushrooms, you can say, hey, they're in everything. They're in the bread that we make, they're in the cheese that we eat, they're in the alcohol that we drink, they're in our yogurt, they're in our medicines, our penicillins, they're responsible for all the good stuff that goes on in our gut. You really teach a lot of science with introducing mushrooms to kids. Here's another little boy in another little school looking at chanterelle and smelling it for the first time, because mushrooms will tickle all of the senses. That is really their, number one, I think, superpower, is that you touch them, you smell them, you can eat them, you can hunt for them. They have so many interesting qualities that children get very absorbed by them very, very quickly. This is a photograph of a mushroom table that we did at a walk here last summer. I actually think this might have been one of the ones that Mike was at. And just an example of the varieties that you can introduce on any given walk, which then turns into multiple conversations. And then another thing that I love to do is take any kind of mushrooms that we find and make forage centerpieces with kids, especially if you're at all in a situation where there's not a lot of edible mushrooms. You can go out with an eye just to forage and to look at the various things that you can do decoratively. And in this case, I think, this child made this absolutely fabulous centerpiece from found objects in the woods. The child here is doing a cooking project, and that's one of the things that I really like to stress is that mushrooms are a jumping off point for kids to engage in a whole host of other activities once they get the opportunity to just not hear the one thing that they often hear, which is, don't touch that, it's poisonous, don't eat that, don't get near that, don't learn about that, right? That's really what that means. And we, as mycologists connected to mushroom clubs, have this incredible opportunity to say, yes, learn about that, yes, touch that, yes, engage with that. We have the knowledge, we know that this is a completely okay thing to do. I'm going to stop my share for 1 second because I actually have a one last picture that I want to show. Let me just do this. So my last photograph is I'm going to start sharing one more time. Sorry about that. Let me just go to that real quick. Share again. Okay, so this is a photo of, this is because okay. After my mother died, a friend gave me a letter that she had, and I just want to read a bit of it. She says, speaking of good edibles, we have doing mushrooming like mad and have come up with some wonderful specimens. We have 2 books on the subject, and now we're getting a good idea of what it is to be had hereabouts. The search leads us into all sorts of wonderful woods. The ground coverings are light and tawny with redding leaves and curled up ferns. Looking for mushrooms is like looking for Easter eggs. You part the underbrush, and there, often as not, is a firm, yummy, or a past specimen, all covered with slugs and soggy. This once was great one, but had you been there just a little sooner. But then, a good hunting ground. And that is like any old lady, Italian lady in Spoleto, the knowledge of the earth. And she wrote that in 1961, 3 years before I was born. And occasionally I will go up and visit the hillside in Vermont where she's buried in the field. And last year there was all this rain, and there were the agaricus mushrooms that she had hoped for sprouting up around the grave. And I thought it was a visit, as it were. Okay, so that is a little bit about the benefits and joys of searching for mushrooms with kids, providing access points and opportunities to engage with them and ways to do it. One of the things that I wanted to show was when I went to your mushroom fair, or in general, when I go out and do events with kids, I often will do things like have them make paintings on wooden mushrooms or on these flat ones that they can make into hanging mushrooms. I often really like to use clay like this, and a friend of mine made this really nice display of what you can do with clay and making, facsimiles of mushrooms by studying them really closely. And kids obviously get really excited about that. This is an example here of what I mean by a centerpiece, whoops, where, you just take things from the woods and turn it into something. That's just, I put it on a tray, I put it in the middle of a table when we're having a dinner party, and then the mushrooms are part of our experience at the table. So there's so many ways of bringing nature in to the child, to the family, or going out. Either way, mushrooms are super accessible, and as you all know, they are everywhere. The last thing I want to say is when I'm talking to mushroom clubs, they often don't have or don't know how to have a education program for kids and for families. And they often have mostly adults, and they say, how do we how do we do this? How do we get started? What do we do to engage the next generation in mushroom foraging? And I think we have a responsibility as mushroom clubs, and I'm on the board of a club too, to have programs that are kid specific. And that's one of the things that I'm really excited about with my own work, is going out and offering opportunities for families. It's my favorite thing in the world when grandparents, for example, bring their grandkids to a foraging event. And you get to see this multi-generational connection and this origin story happening before your very eyes. And you see the child having the connection with the grandparent, having the connection with the earth and the mushrooms and the stories, and being in touch with the grandparents' own passion and interest in the subject. That is a very rich and meaningful moment. And I feel very honored that I can help to provide those for families who are looking for that, deep sense of connection that I think mushrooms provide and foraging provides. So having a program where kids and families feel welcome, feel like they have access, feel like it's not going to be too scientific, even though we as mycologists tend to, amateur mycologists, in some cases, really love the science part of it. For some folks, that's less of an invitation. And so I often, will eschew some of the more scientific names and get into some of the very, neat names that are more descriptive in order to have people make sure that they have, feel very, very accessible to mushroom foraging. For some of us, that's what we need in order to feel invited. And I also say, look, there's no questions that are not smart or not, people say, oh, this is a dumb question. There's no such thing. A question that I get very often, almost every event that I ever do, is, can you touch mushrooms? Can you touch mushrooms? I'm here to tell you, yes, you can touch mushrooms, and then we talk about it. But that, mushrooms have gotten such a bad reputation, and we have so much work to do to sort of combat this weird bad rap, that it's a privilege to be in a position where I have enough knowledge to confidently say it's okay. Not only is it okay, but it's absolutely fantastic to start your own relationship with mushrooms. And this is why. So I just did a whole lot of talking, way more than I thought I would. And I'd love to open it up either to questions, if there are any, or to hearing from folks of, in their own, if you have an origin story that you want to share, or if anything resonated for you, or anything about what you've heard. And if you don't have any, I'll just prattle on.
Thank you, Melanie. Would you rather people just speak up?
Sure.
Or...
I'd love to hear from anybody who would like to speak up.
Okay, it looks like we have someone right here.
Great.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm Pascal, and I like your story and your approach. I have 3 daughters myself. I feel I forced them, to go because it was my thing, so the activity was to go mushroom hunting, and they were not so happy at the time when they were younger, but now they are growing up and they appreciate everything,
Yes.
So that's something to keep in mind, is that the kids, when they, when you offer them, mushroom hunting and stuff, they are not especially motivated. But I can tell you that later, when they get in their 20s and adults, they really appreciate this. And so that's something we should add to our forays, maybe add kids welcome to encourage this. But
Yes.
Yeah, I know it's not easy in the first place, but at the end, the reward is really pleasant because they are now
Pascal,
done. They
I
asked
love
me,
hearing.
they asked me to
Yeah,
go mushroom hunting,
yeah.
when I was bringing them earlier, they were not so excited. So
Pascal,
now,
I love that. I love that story. It really touches me. My own son Mason lives in Colorado now, and he told me recently he was on a hike with some of his friends, and they came by a patch of mushrooms, and he knew what everything was, and it
yeah,
was like a party trick. His friends were like, "How do you know what that is?" And they could
yeah.
not believe it. And he said, well, actually, there's a book about my skills as a mushroom hunter. So he really got them. He got them good. But yes, 100%. That the one picture that I showed of my family hunting for morels that spring, that's after like an hour-long hike up a steep ravine. And I got to tell you, they were not happy, right? And I'm like, and now it's time for a picture. But and at this point, just like your daughters, are very glad that we did that and we spent that time together.
Yeah.
So even it's like when you tell your kid, hey, we're gonna go on a hike, and they say, oh, I don't want to go. You say, yeah, no, we're going. We're going. That's great.
Okay,
I love
well,
that.
thank you for this. Yeah, thank you very
Yeah,
much.
thank you. Anyone else? Anyone else's origin story? Does anyone know the first time somebody or or you themselves, um, had that feeling of, oh, I'm interested in this?
Well, as a kid, I grew up in a fungophobic environment.
Hmm.
My mother was German, and you'd think, and she loved to eat mushrooms if she was in a restaurant and would buy mushrooms if she was in a market. But I was always told they were poisonous and would kill me and not to touch them. And, it's pretty interesting. And I didn't, but I was always involved in nature and hiking and backpacking and being in the woods. I never noticed mushrooms. And when I got to California in 1976, a friend actually was at Land's End in San Francisco when they used to have Sunday mushroom walks
Hmm.
at Land's End, run by Larry Stickney. And they would just walk around for an hour or so and collect mushrooms and talk about them. And I wasn't living in San Francisco at the time. He said, Mike, you've got to check this out. You're going to love this. And and I did. And so I came down the next weekend, went to the Land's End mushroom walk with the MSSF, and that's where it started. And but it was really interesting to me looking back on it that before that, as often as I was in the woods and as much hiking and backpacking as I did, I never noticed mushrooms.
Hmm.
And now that's all I do. So,
Yeah, I call it mushroom eyes. Once you get them, you can't unget them, right? You just have them and
right.
you go, how did I not notice this before? Kids have incredibly good mushroom eyes. And part of going back to what Pascal said, part of what introducing your kids or any other kids into the woods is giving them permission, right? Permission to explore with their eyes, with all of their senses, an entirely new universe that previously has been cut off from them. And that is really a quite a transformative thought when you think about it. Like Mike, all these kids have been told, don't even notice the mushrooms. Not only don't touch them, don't even notice them. Much less the fact that those mushrooms are why we exist, right? That they're breaking down every bit of, leaf litter and logs in the wood so that they can make all the soil for all the food that we eat. That is not even on anybody's radar. But the fact that the kids are given permission to have this relationship is really something that I think we as mushroom clubs and as folks who have our own interest. Oh, I don't want to use the word responsibility because that feels a little, heavy. But it like I said, I feel like that's what our privilege is, like to bring people into this passion that we all share. Anyone else? Anyone else want to chime in?
Hi,
Hi.
thank you for doing such important work with children. Um, my origin story is, I got unemployed and led me to do hiking every day, which led me to, yeah, really, that's how it had, how it happened. I live near Buena Vista, which is very close to here.
Yeah.
And that led me to foraging plants because I felt comfortable first, like foraging plants and eating them. And then it led me to mushrooms because I was like, wait, I grew up eating lots of different types of mushrooms because I'm Korean American and my
Yeah.
parents are immigrants. So, and then I was actually going to turn away from mushrooms because I was like, why am I so into this? And then I ran across a company that's making leather out of mushroom mycelium. And my background is actually in fashion. So
Not
that
Ecovative, a different company, or
it's a different company.
Yeah.
They
I
might
bring
have
this
a
around and show kids this.
yeah. So
That's wonderful.
That's my origin story. And it is really important because I hope that mushrooms are going to make a difference in the environmental issue. It's a huge and I come from fashion, so I know
Yeah.
it's really such an important issue.
Yeah, I didn't even get into all the stuff that I teach kids when I go out with them, but one of the things that I do is bring mushroom-based materials, whether it's the packaging that Ecovative makes. I bring my forest bacon that Ecovative makes. I bring all of the various different forms of leather and fabrics and things. Then tell them that their sneakers are eventually going to be made out of this. And then we also talk about the grow it yourself kits, which are, made how the mycelium is grown in the forms.
Amazing.
And yeah, so I have quite the setup for taking mushrooms to the next level as far as if kids do show an interest. There's so much, as you all know, that can be explored around it. So it really opens up an incredible world of science, and it's really fun to talk to educators about how they can build their science curriculums into, they could do a whole segment on just fungi, and they could do microscopy, however you say that word. They can do growing mycelium in forms, as there's a whole curriculum around that. They could do a whole segment on species and genuses and the trees and of like, I mean, it's endless. It's endless, and it's all there for them. And it's not on any curriculums anywhere, really. So
Yeah. I think it's wonderful that you're doing that type of work for kids because, to be honest, in fashion and in design in general, I have friends who are in other areas of design like architecture, interior design. They don't really talk about how materials are made and the impact it's having on sustainability. It's not a discussion that happens. So I'm glad that you are talking about this with children for them to start questioning, like, well, where is all this plastic and packaging, where is it coming from, and like what
yeah.
happens to it? So
Yeah.
thank you so much for doing this type of work.
Oh, well,
Really,
thank you all
yeah,
for having
I
me and
really
for being
appreciate it.
interested. Yeah, I really appreciate it as well. Mike, where are we at with time? And do you want to do we have more
Hi.
folks?
I was muted.
Ah,
Well, why don't we put out one last appeal for another question? It's 8:15. So it's getting very late for you.
Of course,
So
now
at
I'm
this
all
point-
jazzed up and excited and I'll never get to sleep.
Well, there we go.
All
Here's your next question.
right, hello.
Hello to you. This is a seminal question about mycophobia and mycophilia. What do you think is the origination of this, especially in Western consciousness? There was a great fear of mushrooms. And I'm thinking of Gordon Wasson going back to the 1950s. His wife was Russian, and they felt that mushrooms were like a meat, and there was no fear. But somehow in the West, there is this phobia. So my question to you is, what is the generation of this? When is the beginning of this phobia? Is it to do with the ego? Is it to do with fear? Is it to do with the unknown? I'm just sort of questioning you if you have
Yeah.
any ideas on that.
Well, I think that's a fantastic question. And I'd say actually one I've thought about a lot because what makes my work challenging is when you go into a school, for example, and I've had educators, science teachers, say, we're not comfortable with the kids touching the mushrooms. And I sort of take a deep breath and I go, okay, like, there's just so much work to be done here. Like, where do you begin? And these are like, I'm not even bringing them amanitas, I'm bringing them like cultivated mushrooms or something. So that's how deeply ingrained it is, right? It's such a good question because it has no basis. The phobia has no basis in science. And that's the part that's sort of, head scratching and a little mind boggling. Like, I mean, the best analogy I can give you is sharks, there's first of all, there's like less they're on the par. Sharks and mushrooms are on the par in terms of like the amount of people that go swimming, versus the amount of people that actually ever get bitten by a shark, right? I mean, it's like, 10 million to one or something, it's like, it's a huge number. And so the amount of people that ever, have anything bad happen to them from eating a mushroom, beyond being allergic or something, versus how many people eat mushrooms every single day. It's like, it's such a negligible number. And so it's mostly hype. And why they picked mushrooms, I don't know. But I also think it's the mushrooms are having their moment. They're definitely, I think you all can probably attest in your own everyday lives. You see this. They are really starting to, creep through the consciousness of folks. And I think Fantastic Fungi, the film, actually helped an enormous amount. Somebody put up in the chat about peasants and free food. I mean, somebody could write their dissertation on this. It's all going to be fairly anecdotal as to why folks think this is, but imagine you're me and you go around and you say, I take kids out in the woods and we forage for wild edible mushrooms and we eat them, right? I mean, people look at me like I'm crazy. And oh, isn't that dangerous? Why do you do that? That's, so it's about education. It's really just about education.
You mentioned sharks. This is very interesting because I've surfed over 50 years all over the world. And I always say to myself, answer the sharks. I don't eat you, you don't eat me.
Huh.
Okay.
And they've listened so far.
That's correct.
Unless you've
And-
eaten some sharks and they're
And then the other saying is that there are many bold young mushroom hunters, but the very few old bold mushroom
That's right.
hunters.
That's right. That's right. And I count myself as a non-ambitious mushroom hunter. When I'm teaching mushroom hunting in the woods with kids, or if we were all out together and there was kids involved, one of the things I teach is you don't have to learn every mushroom in the woods. In fact, that's not the best way to go about it. What you do want to do is you want to go out and learn a few mushrooms and then go looking for those particular mushrooms, right? And then add to your repertoire over time so that you're building on your knowledge base. It's impossible to know every mushroom in the woods. Nobody can do it. But it is possible to learn, what a morel looks like, and to go look for it in May, or what a chanterelle looks like and look for that, or certainly what a black trumpet mushroom looks like. Beginner mushrooms are fairly straightforward and easy to identify. And if you go out looking for those particular mushrooms and you ignore all the other ones until you can learn them slowly, that is one way to have an access point where it doesn't feel so overwhelming, when you're doing education. And that's one of the things I teach people, like when they say, oh, you're going to go out in the woods and pick poisonous mushrooms, I say, not me, I'm not going to. I have no interest in picking a poisonous mushroom. I'm not a bold mushroom hunter.
Hmm.
Hence, I'm an old mushroom hunter.
Do you have any comments about psychedelic mycology?
I'm a fan. I mean, listen, it's a time, it's time has come, I'm delighted. I'm thrilled about Eugenia's new book. She's an amazing writer, and I feel like her book coming out, which is called Have a Good Trip, is going to be, it is, that's what it's called. It's coming out in October. And I have another, I have another friend Lauren Aldifer, who just wrote a book here in Vermont with my same publisher called the Microdosing Journal, and it's about mindfulness and microdosing. I think there's a huge appetite for it, and I think there's a really, really good, a lot of good systems in place for addressing mental health, whether it's through microdosing or through these, arranged situations which are, chaperoned. I've only heard and read and anecdotally and so on through folks who I've known who have benefited. So I haven't personally ever foraged for psilocybin. We have it occasionally up here in Vermont, but I've never made that a quest of myself personally. But no, I'm very optimistic and excited to see what mushroom medicine will bring.
Do you see any parallels with NASA in the exploration of outer space, as well as the intra-space search in the domain of our consciousness?
Oh, I really feel like you have a different guest in mind. I must look like a genius.
You're beautiful. Thank you.
Oh, wow. I love that question. Hi.
Hello. Hi. I got very curious on the topic of psychedelics and you liking them, but also introducing your kids to foraging. How is it that you introduce the conversation to your kids about mushrooms also being psychedelic? And
yeah, that's a great question. There's a good podcast. I was on it recently called well, there's two. Oh gosh, I hope I don't mangle the name. Healing, it's called Your Highness, HIGHNESS, and she does, Your Highness Media, she does a whole kids program about introducing plant medicine to kids. And it's a little bit about like, how do I want to say this? For parents who have been, really open with their, whatever they're doing and wanting to not be secretive with their children, right? So ways to have those conversations. I think that she's doing really good work with that. I mean, I'm a Montessori parent, and Mason Goes Mushrooming is a Montessori book, which means that it's about respect for the child, respect for their innate understandings of things. And in Mason Goes Mushrooming, it's really about his own exploration of the fungi universe. There's very few grown-ups in the whole book. And I have approached with my parenting and my kids anything to do with substance uses in the same way. So that, we have open conversations. I really try to dissuade them from anything that's chemical, not a good thing. Like, stay away from anything that's chemically based. And, we have open and honest conversations. And really, that's, I think, all you can do as a parent in they're gonna hear about the stuff anyway. They're gonna get offered it. They're going to go to college eventually, and then it's gonna be like a free-for-all. So they might as well have a little bit of, go armed with a little bit of real information that they could have at home. And I certainly have had many such conversations with, I have 4 kids, aged 18 to 30, and over the years, we've had lots of conversations about all sorts of substances. So, and I think one of the unspoken substances, and I don't know how we got into this, is alcohol, right? And the fact that alcohol is so easily accessible and easily consumed and sort of modeled for our kids, and yet we can't talk about these other, mind-altering substances. So yeah, I have a lot to say on that subject. It has nothing to do with fungi education, but we could go on. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, thank you. Yes.
So Melanie,
Yes.
so it's getting very late for you. We're on
Yeah.
for an hour.
Yeah.
Are we ready to call it a night?
Absolutely. I wasn't kidding when I said I'm really very excited to have had this conversation and to hear the thoughtfulness of these questions and what people are contemplating. It's really such a privilege to be here. I thank you so much, Mike, for inviting me.
Well, you did a wonderful job, Melanie, and I really appreciate you hanging in there this late. And we had a lot of great questions. So in any case, thank you. And
Well,
we'll
thank
see you
you.
next time.
Absolutely. Thank you all. Thank you, San Francisco.
Well, I see people clapping, so.
Okay.